All right, thanks everybody. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you. I wish we could all be together in the same room, but given that we live all around the world, that's a little harder. But it's nice. It's nice that everybody takes a little time out of their Friday and Shabbat preparations to study Parashat Shavua together. We're going to look today at the end of an arc of a long story. So give me a minute to summarize, to freshen in our minds, because the story began several weeks ago. As you know, well, you may or may not know. Here we go. Isaac and Rebekah had twins, Jacob and Esau, and from the start they were very different. Out of the womb, the Torah describes one as a big, healthy baby and one as a little smaller baby. And they grew up. Esau becomes a man of the woods and a hunter and a man of strength. And the Torah says that Jacob is Ish Ohalim, a person who stays at home inside the tent. As you know, there's a rivalry between the two. Jacob, as the elder, should inherit the family birthright. Esau as the, I don't know if I said that right. Esau as the elder should inherit the family birthright, and Jacob, with some trickery in connected with his mom, tricks his brother out of the birthright. One by purchasing it for a bowl of lentil soup, and also by dressing up as his brother and sneaking into his dad's tent to get the blessing. That leads to a rift in the family, and Jacob has to flee the house, and he spends many years away working for his mother's brother, where he acquires a large family and lots of wealth. And at the beginning of this week's Parsha is when the two brothers finally reunite after decades of being apart, with potentially a lot of tension in the scene. What we're going to do this morning is look at the verses of the reunion to try to evaluate the sincerity of the two brothers, to see how much of a reunion this really was and how much they really mean what they say. After we look at the passage from this week's Parsha and talk about it a little bit, we're going to look at a few comments from the rabbinic tradition about the motivations of Jacob in particular. And at the end, I have some things to say about Esau, who, spoiler alert, I think gets a bum rap, as they say, in our tradition, and we'll see how that emerges as we go. I would love it if over the course of today we can have some volunteers from the group to read some of the text. If you're interested in being a reader, put your name in the text and say, I'd love to read. And Julie, if you don't mind helping me when we get to places, choosing one of those people to read.
Will do.
All right, there we go. All set? That's the intro. Okay, I got some smiles and some nods. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And what you're looking at are the first 16 verses of chapter 33 of Breshit, of Genesis. This is the reunion scene. So we need someone who's already in a time zone where you're wide awake, because this is a longer passage. I'd love here to have a volunteer to read this passage. And as you read and or listen to the passage, consider the nature of this reunion. Do you think Jacob's sincere? Do you think Esau is sincere? Those are the questions we're going to come back to. Is this a real reuniting of brothers that resolves the tension from decades before? Or is this more of the same?
Jay, thank you for volunteering.
Okay.
Looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming, accompanied by 400 men. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids, putting the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went ahead and bowed low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother. Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept. Looking ahead, he saw the women and the children. Who, he asked, are these with you? He answered, the children with whom God has favored your servant. Then the maids with their children came forward and bowed low. Next, Leah with her children came forward and bowed low. And last, Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed low. And he asked, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?" He answered, "To gain my Lord's favor." Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours." But Jacob said, "No, I pray you, if you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Please accept my presents which has been brought to you, for God has favored me, and I have plenty." And when he urged him, he accepted. And Esau said, "Let us start on our journey, and I will proceed at your pace." But he said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and the flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me. If they are driven hard a single day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord go on ahead of his servant while I travel slowly, at the pace of the cattle before me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." Then Esau said, "Let me assign you some of my men who are with me." But he said, "Oh no, my Lord is too kind to me." So Esau started back that day on his way to Seir.
All right. Thank you very much, Jay. I appreciate that. You have in the chat, you can click on a link in the chat that will bring you to this document if you want to keep looking at the text for the moment. But for the moment, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we could all see each other's that are here together. And the question I have for you is, hearing this story, hearing this text, do you think this is a positive reunion of brothers or a negative reunion? Do you think the brothers are sincere in their desire to reconnect? Love to hear a few comments from the group about your take on both Jacob and Esau as they reunite in this passage. You can raise your hand or put something in the chat that says you'd like to speak. Michael, do you want to unmute and share?
Yes. If this is right, Michael. Yeah, I think there's trepidation in the greeting. I mean, I think there's a lot of tension, and the break point for that is when they kiss. But I think both sides are hurting over it.
Okay. And what did you see details in the text that lead you to see? What are some of the details that see the trepidation?
I think this. Again, it seems very formal for two brothers, and everybody's all lined up. And I know the rabbis make a deal about the order of greeting of the children to Esau and the wives, and that Joseph comes up front to protect his mother Leah. But that's not in this text. That's the rabbi.
So, right. All right, but true. I hear what you say. I want to echo that. There is a formality, right? It's not right. Someone just rings the front doorbell and there are lots of hugs. There's a whole. It almost feels like a formal court sort of ceremony where people are lined up to meet, and there's a formality to the greeting that says there might be some tension here. Okay, let's hear from Jody and then Rosa, who I saw your hand went up. So, and Robert after that, and then we'll see where we are from there.
Okay, I think that there is tension, but I think there's lack of trust, because when Esau says, I will send my men with you, he says, no, thank you. You can tell that he's very nervous, and he has reason to be. He's done a terrible thing to his older brother, and he knows it. At least he's aware. But I sense a lot of lack of trust and a lot of tension in the meeting.
Nice. And you pointed to an important detail there, right? There's Esau has 400 men with him. It could be an honor guard, or it could be an ambush.
Well,
right? And depending on how you want to read the text and how sincere or how generous Esau is being. But that does lead to potentially some tension on and nervousness on Jacob's side.
and Jacob himself is the one who's been sort of outwitted by Laban all those years. So he's even more untrusting than he might have been before.
Okay. So his relation, right, the decades that we skipped over that we're not looking at today, Jacob has a tense relationship with his uncle that also, right, he might not be such a trusting person. All right, thank you. Rosa.
So I think that the mistrust is all on the part of Jacob. I think Esau has always been a little bit guileless. He's a hunter, everything he's always done has been impetuous and, if anything, loving. He was certainly loving towards his father, very devoted to his father. I think the lack of trust is all on Yaakov's side, and I know I'm probably being a little bit disrespectful to one of our avot, but I think actually Yaakov was a scoundrel, and he didn't trust because that was his personality. He himself would have done Esau harm if he could, and therefore he felt Esau was going to do him harm.
Nice. I like, that's a great interpretation here. And I would say to what you said, our tradition sometimes reads these stories, especially in Bereshit, a few ways. One is a piece that automatically assumes that our ancestors did what was right and their behavior was always laudatory and we should respect them and read into their actions always only the best of intent and the best of character traits. There's also a way to read the text that says, well, maybe these people aren't so perfect. And in Jewish tradition, you sort of have a tension between both of those voices. I would say my bias is I like the more scandalous story. I think it's part of what makes these stories compelling is that in our tradition, the hero figures aren't perfect. They're real humans with real emotions and real weaknesses and real foibles. And I don't think it's disrespectful to say, well, Jacob might be a scoundrel. I would commend you for saying that. And as you'll see in a moment, I might be in the same camp as you. All right, I had called on someone to be next, but I've forgotten who that was. Oh, Robert, go ahead. Can you unmute?
I was struck by the phrase, I see the face of God, when he says to Esau. As a very dramatic statement. Does it, contemporary theology with of God's presence in each one of us be reflected in that statement? Or what? It's a very dramatic statement.
Yeah, I think, right, there is, we see, right, seeing God in the face of other people, right, seeing God within other people, right, it's an element of contemporary theology. It's also rooted in the Bible where we see that, the Genesis early on talks about God creating people in God's image so that we're a reflection of God in some way. I think it's a powerful statement, that maybe is a moment to see Jacob is trying to appease his brother or, in seeing the face of God within his brother, calls the power of the moment and the reunion. I think thank you for calling that out. All right, I see that we have been speaking. There's been a terrific mix of other comments also in the chat. And I'm glad people chatted things there because I'm also noticing the time as we're at halfway through. I want us to take a look at the commentaries a little bit. So if you had a comment that you weren't able to make in this section, you can add it to the chat. And in the multitasking of the Zoom classroom, people can read the chat as we look together. I want us to focus. I'm going to share my screen again a second and bring us back to the text. And we're going to want us to just focus at the end, right? Someone had mentioned earlier, right, that Esau volunteers his honor guard to bring Jacob back with him to Seir, where Esau lives, and he has invited Jacob to join him. People had mentioned that this could be an honor guard or it could be, right, a threat. It's not totally clear, and both interpretations are open. And Jacob says, you're too kind, and that's, you're too kind for offering that. I don't need it. It's seen as a rejection of that offer. But Jacob does make an agreement with his brother. They do connect here. There is a hug, there is an acceptance of each other, and there's a sort of a agreement they're going to journey together, and that Jacob would travel to Seir, to Esau's home, and they would have some time to be together. Now Jacob sends off his brother first, thinking he will need more time to travel, or at least that's what he says. And where I cut the story right here, but I'm going to move us to the very next verse, which I just scrolled onto my screen there. You'll see at the bottom. The next verse says, but Jacob journeyed to Sukkot and built a house for himself and made stalls for his cattle. And that's why the place was called Sukkot, right? He made booths there. And it's interesting to me, the end of the story in the Bible. Jacob says, I'll meet you at Seir, sends off his brother, says, I don't need the escort, I will see you. Esau departs, and Jacob heads to Sukkot and settles there. Says to me, back to the original question, that Jacob in the reunion here, maybe, right, people are right that he might be right to be nervous, but he does sort of agree that he's going to reconnect with his brother and that this reunion will continue. But Jacob never makes it. He doesn't go. He doesn't show up. He was invited for Thanksgiving. It wasn't a pandemic year, so he was allowed to visit. But he doesn't show up. There's no reunion. He ends up in a different place. I want us to take a look at 3 different commentaries on the rabbis about Jacob's actions here. Why would he make an agreement with his brother and then not follow through? Why would he go to another place instead? And we're going to see 3 very different perspectives. And then I'll add a little chop of my own at the end. So the first comes from Chizkuni, who's a biblical commentator. That's one of the standard ones on a traditional page of Bible commentators. Is Julie, can you, I don't see the list in the chat anymore. Sorry, can you help us find the next reader to read this comment from Chizkuni?
Carrie, do you want to read?
Yeah, okay. I want to make a comment first. The beauty of these stories are, as the rabbi noted, that in Judaism we don't have any past saints. All the patriarchs from Abraham through to Jacob, they're all very imperfect, conflicted human beings. In other words, they're like us, so we can relate to it, and that's really the beauty of the story.
I agree.
When we try to make them perfect, like for example, when I read, say, the Orthodox Art Scroll interpretation, they have to massage the text to try to round out the rough edges and idealize them. I think they're totally missing the essence and the beauty of the stories by doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I forgot that Ginger had volunteered to read.
All right, there'll be more to read also, so Ginger can read the next one.
Great.
Okay, so go ahead.
Go ahead, Carrie, and we'll hear from Ginger next.
Okay, but Jacob journeyed on to Sukkot and built a house for himself and made stalls for his cattle. That is why the place was called Sukkot. Jacob meant that once he had settled his wives and children and had made suitable arrangements for his flocks and herds, he would visit his brother in his homeland, Seir. At that time, there would be an opportunity to celebrate their reunion with joy.
All right, thank you, Carrie.
I would disagree with that interpretation. I don't think Jacob had any intention of visiting his brother. He didn't want to push his luck.
Okay, so Carrie, you're rejecting the interpretation, which is totally fair, and it's in line with what you said before. But Chizkuni is trying to paint Jacob in a little more positive light, smooth out some of the rough edges maybe, and saying, what did Jacob mean when he said, I'll be along and I'll visit you at your home? He didn't mean he was coming right away. He meant, I'm traveling back home from across the Middle East. I need to settle down. I need to make sure my family is safe. I need to get my flocks and herds set up. And after I'm settled back in the land of Israel, I will come visit you in Seir. It's a deferred reunion. Carrie says skeptically, and perhaps you're right, that's a good, well, I would say that's a good read of the Torah. This couldn't possibly be what Jacob meant, but it tries to smooth it out that Jacob is saying, I'm going to come visit you, brother, but he means not immediately, but later. So it buys him some time for his not following through on his decision to go visit his brother, and instead to go to Sukkot instead of Seir. All right, Ginger, the next text comes from the Talmud, takes a very different take, and potentially has some of the edges, the rough edges of the Talmud that sometimes we need to massage, but let's hear the text. Go ahead, Ginger.
Furthermore, if the Gentile asks him where he is going, the Jew should extend the journey when relating his destination to him. For example, he should claim that he is traveling to a place beyond his actual destination, in the manner that Jacob was our father did to the wicked Esau. As it is written that Jacob said to Esau, "Let my Lord pass over before his servant, and I will journey on gently according to the pace of the cattle that are before me and according to the pace of the children, until I come unto my Lord, unto Seir."
All right, thank you, Ginger. So Avodah Zarah is part of the Talmud, and it's a part that deals in part with the relationships between Jews and non-Jews. And the rabbis lived in an era where Jews didn't have it so good. They were persecuted at times by the Roman Empire. The rabbis in Babylonia and the Talmud also had some difficulties at times with the ruling authority in their world. It can be a difficult part of the Talmud to read because it doesn't always paint our non-Jewish neighbors in a positive light, and sometimes needs some massaging. It makes me realize that in our tradition we have both texts that are about being positive with our neighbors and sometimes being skeptical with them. But this takes the example of Jacob and uses it to explain, I think what the rabbis in the Talmud are giving us is travel safety advice. If you're with non-Jews and you're Gentiles and you're feeling threatened, what should you do while you're on a journey? What should you do? You should say that you're traveling farther than you actually are. And if you say that you're traveling by farther than you actually are, you could foil the attempt of the non-Jews to do you harm or to attack you. Like, there's a whole series of stories on this page about rabbis and their students escaping violence from non-Jews on the road. And here they give Jacob the example for that. This reads Jacob different from the first interpretation, but says, and confirms some of what people said. Jacob had real fear and real trepidation. He didn't trust his brother. So what did he do? He lied by stretching the truth. He said, I will journey with you forward. I'm going to move in my own pace, but I'm going to journey all the way to Seir. And he said that so that if Esau was going to move ahead and set up an ambush, Jacob would be off the highway, off the road, before he fell into harm's way. Right? And the advice of the Talmud is, when traveling with someone that you're threatened by, tell them you're going farther than you are, so that when you get off along the way, you could sneak off safely. Right? Here is Jacob still feeling the threat, not being sincere in his offer to meet his brother and travel with him to his home, but doing so out of fear and protection and in a desire to stay safe. He stretches the truth by saying he's traveling farther than he was going, but with no intention of really fulfilling that. That's a second interpretation. The third interpretation I bring is from Midrash Breshit Rabbah, rabbinic commentaries and stories about the stories in the Torah. Do we have a third, I guess it's a fourth today, volunteer to read? Is there someone still on the list, Julie?
Yes, Howard.
All right, Howard, go ahead, read this for us, please.
Rabbi Abaye said, "We reviewed the entire Torah and could not find where Jacob, our ancestor, went to visit Esau at Har Seir during his lifetime. It's possible that truthful Jacob was deceitful. Rather, when did Jacob visit Esau? In the days to come, as it is written, for liberators shall march up on Mount Zion to wreak judgment on Mount Esau."
All right, thank you, Howard. There are two things I love about this text. So the first is that the rabbi here is reading this, it says, wait a minute, Jacob says he's going to go visit his brother. I don't remember that happening. So what does he do? He reads the whole Tanakh. He reads the whole Torah to say, wait a minute, I don't remember that story. And he checks, and he lets us know. I checked the Torah. Jacob never makes it. I love that the rabbi has to look it up. We know that he didn't make it, but, he wanted to make sure. He scoured the text. He could not find evidence that Jacob does this. But then he's shocked in the sense of that an earlier contributor said, right, the rabbis would like to read our avot. A number of you said they'd like to read our avot in a friendly way, right? We want Jacob, right? Truthful Jacob. Is it possible that he was deceitful? There's a whole question that how could it be that one of our ancestors, one of our avot, lied or was deceitful to his brother? Note, by the way, that the Avodah Zarah text was comfortable with him being deceitful to protect his own safety. That's a different issue. But so how do they explain that he wasn't being deceitful in this midrash? Well, it's not that he was going to go later, like the first text said, right? Chizkuni said, I'm going to come later when I'm settled, right? Here, this midrash says, I'm going to come later, meaning in the end of days, in the days to come. It's an allusion to the Messianic era. And the midrash quotes from the prophet Obadiah saying, this is in Hebrew, if you're a daily davener, you'll recognize this verse from, it's in the morning Shacharit service, right? The liberators shall march up to Mount Zion and wreak judgment on Mount Esau, right? Meaning on Har Seir, right? On where Esau is. And what does this text say? This text is saying that, yes, Jacob will eventually visit, but not anywhere near soon. In the Messianic era, he will visit him at the time when, in the vision of the prophets, those who are God's true partners, right, the future Israelites, will be redeemed. They will march up to Mount Zion, the place of our temple, and judgment will come to all the other nations who were not nice to us along the way. So when will Jacob visit Esau? Much, much, much later. And when he visits him, it won't be to celebrate their reunion joyously, like Chizkuni stated. It will be a moment of revenge and judgment where Esau will get his what's coming to him for being not such a nice guy. So those are these three texts, three different perspectives. And now I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I want to add just one perspective of my own. As I've read this story over the years, I always think about Esau, because I read these stories going back all the weeks and see that Esau doesn't seem to be such a bad guy. He might not be so invested in the family birthright. He might not be so interested in the covenant with God, but he just wants to hunt. He wants to bring food to his father. It doesn't seem that he, along the way, has done anything, in the biblical text anyways, that earns him a bad reputation. Esau becomes a stand-in for the Roman Empire later in Jewish writings. He becomes a stand-in for all sorts of evil forces that attack the Jewish people. And I think that's an unfair legacy to attribute to that biblical character. And I've dug our sources for texts that try to explain more what Esau is feeling in a favorable light. And sort of like the rabbi in the Midrash, I've searched rabbinic sources for something nice to say about Esau, and I have not found it. But at this moment, at the end of this story, I feel really sad for him. And this is the scene I envision. I think about Esau goes back home, knows his brother is on the way because his brother said he's coming, knows it'll be a little while because Esau was traveling with 400 of his, guards or men, but Jacob has this whole camp. But what does Esau do? In my mind, he starts to prepare the feast. He picks the recipe, he slaughters the animal, he begins to cook and prepare, he sets the table, it's all ready, and then he sits down, on the chair on his porch and waits. And he waits. And he waits. And Jacob never comes. And to me, this story is a tragedy that here these two brothers who had a conflict of their making or not of their making, but that lasted decades. And now as Jacob is returning to his homeland, he can't bring himself to overcome the tension from before, he deceives his brother one more time and leaves him waiting. And I picture Esau waiting for a long, long, long time in hope that his brother will come, and his brother never comes. And I feel for the sadness of Esau sitting there waiting for the reunion, the joyful reunion and celebration that was promised him, that he left the greeting, then the original reunion, and never got to have. And I feel really, really, really bad for him. Now, the one consolation, I guess, for this is later in the Torah, the two men do get together to bury their father. So there is a coming together when they lose their father for the funeral, but there aren't any words in the Torah about what that encounter is. The Torah is brief, saying the two men come together to bury their father. So they could at least bury the hatchet enough to bury the father. I have no idea what that encounter looked like based on what the Torah says, because it gives us no clues. But I imagine Esau, is hopeful that a reunion that a new stage could truly take off. And I'm skeptical about where Jacob could, even at that stage, overcome whatever's inside of him that doesn't let him truly reunite with his brother. But mostly I feel sad for Esau. So I see we're at 11:03. It's a Torah study is rich, and a half hour is on a busy Friday is a good time to dedicate to it. But I'm always left with wishing we had more time. But I commend you all for being here to study Torah. I hope these texts were new and interesting for you, and I hope you're able to look at both Jacob and Esau in some new lights and from different perspectives as a result of our study today. And with that, I turn things back to Julie.